She laughed in French at my mashed potatoes, and I heard every word. The sentence probably sounds small, like the sort of petty indignity you might shrug at, until you understand where it landed. At my dining table, under the lamps my late husband and I had hung together, in the house I had kept warm for 32 years. The laugh was delicate, precise, as if she'd practiced it in a mirror. The words came quick and soft, the kind of half-sentence meant to look like a joke to anyone who didn't speak the language. She thought I wouldn't understand. She thought she could make me feel tiny without anyone noticing. Her name is Camille. She is bright and young in ways that show when she wants them to, with a laugh that flutters and a perfume that lingers like a promise. She is the woman my son, Peter, will marry this summer. He met her at work. She's lived abroad, speaks 3 languages, wears clothes as if they were poems. From the moment she came into our lives, I felt a tiny shift, like the weather changing before a storm. My son glowed in her orbit. His voice softened when he spoke her name. He brought her home for dinner one evening, and we all sat down to roast chicken and a low-simmered gravy he called your mother's recipe, as if to flatter me. The house smelled of rosemary and memories. Everything in that room suggested civility. The tablecloth was ironed, the candles were lit. Peter poured wine with the care of someone, showing a new partner the rituals he'd grown up with. I sat across from Camille, smiling in that way mothers do when they try to be welcoming to a person their child loves. I held my fork like a mediator between worlds. She ate politely for the first course. She pronounced the potatoes rustic, in a way that sounded complimentary. Then, in the quiet between forks and conversation, she made a comment in French meant to be private. Not cruel, she'd likely claim later, merely witty, an aside for her fiancé. I smiled politely, and she assumed I smiled because I hadn't caught the joke. She assumed wrong. Tu sais, les plats ici sont ses compagnons. C'est charmant, mais un peu rustique, she said, the words soft and neat. Like a cottage in a village. So quaint. She laughed, a little sound like a bell, and everyone at the table, except me, joined in the polite kindness of new-in-law amusement. Peter looked delighted, as if his life were a film and he had found the perfect co-star. Emily, my daughter-in-law, offered an approving smile. My grandson, Liam, bounced in his chair oblivious, slurping his soup with the unconcern of children. In that half-second when the world tilted, I felt the air press against my skin like something cold. I didn't swallow the words the way you might swallow a fly and move on. I tuned the part of myself that has always listened for tone and subtext. Camille's voice was meant to exclude. It was meant to signal sophistication, and beneath it, a quiet judgment. You belong to a different class, a different story. This table is merely tolerable for the moment. There's a peculiar, dizzying quality when someone you love steps into a new life and begins to rearrange the furniture, not with hammers, but with gestures. They set new rules. They teach new manners. They draw a map that doesn't include certain old routes because those routes smell of debt, of history, of a life they would rather not see. That first evening was a small thing. It was also a test. And I failed in their sight because I laughed too long at a memory, because my hands were accustomed to the rhythm of the fork in a way that betrayed the quiet years I had carried alone. I cleared the plates after dinner while the rest of the family chit-chat in the living room. I can do that without thinking now. Fold china, stack silver, move the crumbs back into order. But I stood by the sink longer that night, fingers idly twirling the tea towel while Camille's laugh traveled through the house like an echo. I felt something unfamiliar, not only embarrassment, but an old, slow anger kindled into life. It wasn't the French itself that stung. My mother had been from the city across the river and had known a smattering of languages herself. She used to teach me little phrases from time to time in a voice full of mischief. No, the hurt was the way the words were folded deliberately into a private corner, meant to be seen by everyone else as harmless flippancy. She had assumed what many newcomers assume, that the older woman would not understand the cadences of a foreign tongue, that language could become a tool of exclusion. Camille had used a language to make me feel foreign in my own home. I didn't say anything that night. Some people would have. Some people might have called her out, demanded apology, created a scene dramatic enough to be remarked upon in the family group chat for weeks. But I'd learned that not all wounds get the luxury of public correction. Sometimes you hold the bruise to see how it will heal. Power sometimes reveals itself in silence. The days that followed rewove the household around Camille. Peter seemed to find new joy in rearranging the garden furniture as if to accommodate her aesthetic. He called more during the day, his voice light and distracted in a way that suggested he was somewhere between two lives. My daughter, Helen, who lives 3 towns away, texted to say how refreshing it was to have someone with cultural polish join the family. They sent photos of Camille's apartment, minimal, sunlit, a perfect magazine spread, and I scrolled through them with a curious ache. Weeks passed before the next dinner. Camille brought a loaf of bread she had baked herself. She had learned certain recipes in Bordeaux and wanted to share authentic baguette, she said with a flourish, handing me the warm cloth-wrapped loaf. The gesture should have been a bridge, and perhaps it was meant to appear as one. But the table felt different, the placement of cutlery a new choreography. She sat with deliberate posture, arching her back in a way that called attention to her collarbone like jewelry. Halfway through the second meal, my son excused himself to get the mail. He kissed Camille and left the room, and the laughter resumed like a tide. Camille leaned in and, more quietly this time, said something in French just beneath her breath. It was swift, delicate, almost like a petal falling. I knew the cadence well, something small, private, meant to be shared between conspirators. I looked up and pretended to rearrange the salt shaker. Is everything all right? Emily asked, watching me. Yes, I said, and the voice that answered sounded thin even to my own ears. Later, when Peter and Camille were out in the garden talking about their honeymoon plans in Provence, I lingered by the window, a cup of tea cooling in my hands. The late summer light softened the edges of their silhouettes. They seemed to belong to a life unreachable to me. I remembered my father, the way he used to speak in a language of jokes and small kindnesses that made me feel held. A slow, aching loneliness settled over me like a shawl. A week passed. Invitations to gatherings started to be extended with the unspoken caveat I could feel but not always translate. This will be a gathering with the young, the cultured, the future-facing. My name was included in paper form, but the energy of the events shifted. I noticed it in the way Amanda from down the street, who used to bring over extra pies every winter, now asked delicately if I really wanted to go to the art opening, as if suggesting I might better enjoy tea at home. There were polite apologies that masked judgments, offers of help that came laden with distance. Small slights coalesced into a pattern. I started to recognize the edges of an effort to remap the family's social geography, not malicious in broad strokes, perhaps, but precise in its consequences. Camille, with her foreign words and easy elegance, was not just commenting on my mashed potatoes. She was remaking the hearth into a stage where I felt like an understudy in my own play. One afternoon, Helen called. "Have you seen the photos from Camilla's little soirée?" she asked. Her voice had a sheen of approval, the kind that belongs to someone checking a list. When I said I hadn't been invited, she laughed, a soft, apologetic sound. "Oh, don't be silly. She's building new circles. You wouldn't have. She's looking for like-minded people. You know how it is." I felt something in me snap. Not at Helen. I love my daughter, and she is gentle in ways the world rarely requires of her, but at the slim, efficient machinery of exclusion. If being left out had a sound, it would be that laugh. Not cruel, not overt, but subtly decisive. Then came the day that changed the balance. It was an ordinary Saturday, linen folded, the radio low, the sunlight strung across the dining room like a net. Peter called earlier to say he had to pick up a gift for Camille's birthday and would stop by with a cake. He arrived with the kind of forced cheerfulness people use when suspicion is about to be revealed. They stayed for coffee. Conversation was polite, shallow. Camille sliced the cake with a precision that bordered on performance, and then, leaning forward in a gesture I couldn't have rehearsed if I tried, she said something in French so quick I caught only the tail of it. A soft phrase, the shape of it pretty as a folded napkin. It landed like a small stone. The cake plates were cleared. The house hummed with ordinary comforts. Then, almost without warning, Camille reached into her bag and produced a small, elegantly wrapped box. "A little something for my mother-in-law," she trilled in accented English. Her smile was a sun that I didn't cast. I took the box as if taking a test. Inside, wrapped in tissue, was a tiny silver spoon engraved with floral swirls. It was delicate, pretty, The kind of gift that says, I know how to be tasteful. I forced a smile, thanked her, and told myself there was nothing here but kindness. Later, alone in the kitchen, I tried the spoon against a bowl of yogurt and examined its weight. It was beautiful. It was also small, and the engravings were the kind of aesthetic that spoke to an imagined pedigree I did not possess. That evening, when Peter went to bed, his hand lingered on my shoulder with a warmth I had missed. "She's brilliant, Mum," he said softly. "She's different. You should try to get to know her more." His voice carried that earnest plea many sons offer when they are in love and blinded by it. I wanted to tell him many things. That different is not always better, that brilliance can be a wardrobe full of glittering things that catch light but not substance. I wanted to tell him that his laughter in French, his private jokes, the way he had begun to copy little turns of phrase from Camille, none of it removed the memory of the long hours I had worked to raise him. But I kept my mouth closed. Love, even when it stings, deserves room. 2 nights later, I overheard a conversation through the open kitchen door. A soft murmur, words like lace. Peter and Camille were arranging the seating for the rehearsal dinner. "We should keep it intimate," Camille said. "Just family and a few close friends. No one who..." She broke off and laughed softly, unfinished. "No one who would bring that energy." Peter nodded. "I don't want anything awkward." He sounded tired, as if he were already pruning parts of his past to sculpt a future she liked. I stood very still until the conversation drifted into talk of wine, lists, and flowers. I stood there feeling like a ghost inhabiting a house with its lights still on, unmoving. There was love in that home, unadorned, stubborn love, but it seemed to be under negotiation. The family table, once a place of belonging, was being redrawn with margin notes in someone else's hand. That night, while the house slept, I wrapped the little silver spoon back into its tissue. I placed it in a small box with a ribbon and dragged over a sheet of paper. I wrote slowly, the way one chisels a stone. If home is to remain a place where I am welcome, I will not be belittled at my own table. I will not be reduced to a polite anecdote in someone else's story. I folded the note and tucked it into the box. The next morning, I placed the box on the kitchen windowsill where the sunlight would catch the silver. I did not say anything. I would not create a scene. But I would hold on to the fact that the table I had kept warm was mine as much as any architect's or lover's idea of taste. I had lost much in life, but I had not yet lost the right to be more than an object of polite amusement. Near noon, there was a gentle knock. Peter entered with a grin and the effusive air of someone in the honeymoon of a new love. He paused when he saw the box. "Oh, Mum," he said, touching the ribbon lightly. "You didn't have to. I kept your spoon safe," I said simply. "It's delicate." My voice was ordinary. I wanted him to see me, and perhaps for the first time that day he did. There was a moment when I thought everything could be repaired by tenderness alone. But as he turned to leave, Camille hovered in the doorway like a watercolor full of edges. She glanced at the box, then at me, and smiled with a smallness that was both graceful and precise. "You are so charming," she said in French, just under her breath, as if gifting the language to the air. "Too SSI adorable. Like a little scene from a countryside postcard." Her voice landed in the room like a new set of curtains, closing a window on an older view. I felt, with the sharpness of a winter frost, that the table had been tested and judged. I understood then that what she considered charm was a polite dismissal of everything I had been, a way to make me decorative and not vital. I did not answer. Instead, I took the spoon from the box and walked it to the sink. I turned the water on and watched the silver swirl in the suds. The house hummed around me, voices spilling through the walls. Outside, lawnmowers buzzed. The world was as ordinary as it had always been. Inside, something had changed. The warmth that once felt inevitable was now fragile enough that a single well-placed laugh could bruise it. That night, I lay awake and thought of the future party, the rehearsal dinner, the vows. I thought of the ease with which my place at the table could be diminished. I thought of my husband's laugh, of the way his hand used to find mine in the dark, steady and certain. I thought of the many small compromises I had made over the years for the sake of peace, and I wondered if this was one compromise too many. When sleep finally came, it was thin. In the dark of the night, I heard Camille's laughter again, the soft French syllables like wind through a chinked window. I rolled onto my side and placed a hand over my heart as though to silence the new ache. I could not yet see the shape of what was to come, but I felt a small, stubborn ember glow somewhere beneath the hurt, a part of me that would not be amused into silence. And in that small ember, a thought rose, audacious and steady. If they will belittle me in my house, I will learn to make myself heard without shouting. If they think language can exclude me, I will find the words that make them notice. The world could change its manners. I could change mine. I woke the next morning with the echo of that laugh still thrumming inside me. It was strange how something so small, a few syllables, a flicker of amusement, could carry such weight. But it wasn't just the words. It was what they revealed, an undercurrent that had always been invisible but was suddenly, undeniably there. Camille didn't see me as a mother to be respected, or as part of the family she was marrying into. To her, I was quaint, decorative, a relic at the table. The uneasy breakfast. Peter arrived the following Sunday for breakfast, Camille trailing behind him, her hair tied in a silk scarf that looked like it belonged in a Paris boutique. I made pancakes, the way I always had, fluffy, golden, served with warm syrup and strawberries. It was a simple comfort, a ritual of our family mornings. Camille smiled politely as I served her plate, but I noticed the way her lips pressed thin when the butter melted across the pancake stack. "So sweet," she murmured to Peter in French, her tone light but dismissive. "So heavy." I set the syrup bottle down with deliberate care, forcing myself to act as though I hadn't understood. But Peter caught the hesitation in my hand. He glanced between us, frowning. "What is it, Mum?" he asked. "Nothing," I said softly, though my voice was tight. "Just thinking how quickly things change." Camille gave me that practiced smile, the kind that hides more than it shows. Whispers of division. Later that week, my daughter Helen called. "Mum, I don't know how to say this delicately," she began, her voice hesitant, "but Peter mentioned you've been tense. With Camille." I pressed the phone to my ear, my heart sinking. "Did he say why?" "Just that you've been misunderstanding her. That maybe you feel threatened." "Threatened?" I repeated, heat rising in my chest. "By what?" "By her French. By her little jokes. She thinks I don't understand." Helen sighed. "Mum, she's trying. She's cultured, she's different. You should give her a chance. Don't push Peter away by being difficult." The words landed like stones. Difficult. I had raised 3 children, buried a husband, kept a home alive through lean years, and now I was being called difficult for noticing the small knives slipped beneath polite conversation. "Thank you, Helen," I said stiffly, ending the call. But when I set the phone down, my hands trembled. The rehearsal dinner plans. A week later, Peter and Camille invited me to their apartment to discuss rehearsal dinner plans. The space was pristine. White walls, glass vases with single flowers, books arranged by color. I felt clumsy just standing there, as though my very presence scuffed the perfection. Camille poured me tea into delicate cups that looked as though they'd never seen a dishwasher. "We were thinking of keeping the dinner small," she said, her tone casual. "Just immediate family and a few friends. Very curated." I nodded, though my heart clenched. "Curated," I echoed. "Yes," she continued, smiling at Peter. "It's important the atmosphere feels elevated. No offense, of course, but sometimes too many voices make things chaotic." I understood what she meant, even if she didn't say it outright. My voice, my presence, my laughter, my food, my history, all the things that made our family dinners alive, were being labeled chaos. Peter squeezed her hand, nodding. "It'll be beautiful," he said. "Simple, elegant." I stared into my tea, the porcelain trembling against its saucer. A visit from Emily. My daughter-in-law, Emily, stopped by a few days later, her face troubled. She sat at my kitchen table, her fingers tracing the grain of the wood. "Loretta," she said gently, "I think you should know. Camille has been saying things. To the neighbors, to friends. Little comments. About how you're set in your ways. How you don't understand her world." My chest tightened. "So it isn't just me she mocks." Emily nodded sadly. I didn't want to believe it, but I heard her myself at the book club. She laughed about how you tried to make French onion soup once and called it rustic instead of refined. She said it was charming but outdated. I pressed my hands flat on the table, grounding myself. Thank you for telling me, Emily. She hesitated. I don't think Peter knows. Or maybe he refuses to see. But it's spreading. And I don't want you blindsided. The tension breaks. That Sunday, Peter and Camille invited me again for dinner. The table was set like a magazine spread. Linen napkins, crystal glasses, a centerpiece of lilies. Camille served cocoa vin, her movements graceful, deliberate, as though she were on stage. Halfway through the meal, she leaned toward Peter and whispered in French, just loud enough for me to hear. Elle ne parle pas vraiment ici, n'est-ce pas? She doesn't really belong here, does she? I froze, the words slicing clean through me. This wasn't just subtle mockery. This was exclusion, spoken aloud, meant to test whether I would break. Peter chuckled softly, distracted, not fully hearing. But I had heard. Every syllable. I set my fork down, my hands trembling. For a moment, I considered staying silent, letting the words hang in the air like invisible smoke. But something in me snapped, not with anger, but with clarity. I looked at Camille directly, my voice calm but firm. I understood that. The room fell silent. Peter blinked, confused. Camille's smile faltered. You think I don't hear, don't see. I continued, my voice steady now. But I do. I hear every word. And I will not be erased from my own family's table. The cliffhanger. Peter looked between us, his face pale. Mom, what are you saying? What did she say? Camille's hand shot out, gripping his wrist, her face suddenly tight. It was nothing. Just a joke. She misunderstood. But I didn't look away. I held Peter's gaze, my heart pounding. No, son. I understood perfectly. And you need to hear what's truly being said. The air was electric, brittle, ready to shatter. And in that suspended moment, I knew. The truth was finally out. The question was whether my son would see it, or choose to remain blind. The silence at that dinner table stretched long enough to feel like punishment. Peter's fork hovered midair, his eyes flicking between me and Camille as if he had stumbled into a foreign film without subtitles. He hadn't caught her words. But I had, and the mask Camille wore, that polished elegance, had cracked for the first time in front of him. Peter demands the truth. Tell me what she said. Peter asked, his voice low, uneasy. Camille let out a soft laugh, brittle and unconvincing. It was nothing, mon amour. Just a little joke, a slip of the tongue. Your mother misheard. I leaned forward, my palms flat on the table, every nerve in my body buzzing. I didn't mishear. She said I don't belong here. At my own son's table. Peter's face paled. He turned to Camille. Is that true? Her smile faltered, then sharpened. You're twisting my words. I was only... She stopped, catching herself, realizing that excuses would only sink her further. The air between us hardened. For years, I had bitten my tongue, kept the peace, let small slights roll past me for the sake of family harmony. But tonight I saw the truth clearly. If I stayed silent now, I would be erased completely. The letter. 3 days later, an envelope appeared in my mailbox. No return address, just my name in neat handwriting. Inside was a single page, folded twice. It read, You are not wrong. Camille is not who she says she is. She's after something more than Peter's heart. Don't let her fool him. Ask her about Paris, 2017. My hands trembled as I reread the words. Paris, 2017. What had happened there? Who had sent me this warning? I slipped the letter back into its envelope and tucked it in my dresser. 4 hours, my thoughts churned like a storm. Could it be a cruel trick? Or was this the missing piece of the puzzle I'd been sensing all along? The call from Emily. That evening, Emily rang me. Her voice was hushed, as though she were afraid of being overheard. Loretta, I don't know how to say this, but I've heard things about Camille. What things? I pressed. Emily hesitated. A friend of mine works in finance. She swears she saw Camille in Paris years ago, mixed up with someone in a scandal. Money gone missing, accounts frozen, quiet whispers. They called it opportunism. My heart pounded. Opportunism. A word that could tear families apart. The dinner confrontation. The following Sunday, I gathered my courage and went to Peter's apartment. He opened the door, his smile cautious. Camille hovered in the background, her posture perfect, her eyes wary. I stepped inside, clutching the letter in my hand. "We need to talk," I said. Peter frowned. "Mom, please." "No, Peter. You need to hear this." I turned to Camille. "Why don't you tell him what happened in Paris?" 2017. For the first time, her face truly changed. The color drained from her cheeks. Her lips parted, but no words came out. Peter blinked, confusion crossing his features. "Paris? What is she talking about?" Camille straightened suddenly, her mask snapping back into place. "It's nothing. Old business. It doesn't matter anymore." But I pressed on, my voice steady. "It matters if it shows who you really are." The shocking revelation. Peter's eyes darkened. "Camille, tell me." Her jaw tightened. For a long moment, she stood frozen, caught between lies and the crushing weight of truth. Then, finally, she spoke. "Yes," she whispered. "I was in Paris. I worked with a man there, a client. There was money. It wasn't illegal, but it was questionable. I walked away before it collapsed. But people talk. They always talk." Peter stared at her as though she were a stranger. "Why didn't you ever tell me this?" "Because it doesn't define me," she snapped. "Because I knew you, or your family, would twist it into something ugly. I've worked too hard to reinvent myself, to build a life away from all of that. I am not that woman anymore." Her words rang in the air, desperate, raw. But in that desperation, her composure slipped again. I saw it. The hunger, the ambition, the willingness to bury inconvenient truths if it meant climbing higher. The cliffhanger. Peter sat back, his face pale, his breath shallow. "I don't know what to believe anymore." Camille reached for his hand. "Believe me, mon amour. I love you. That's all that matters." But his hand stayed limp in hers. His eyes flicked to me, then back to her. "We'll see if that's true." And in that fragile moment, I knew the ground had shifted. The perfect image Camille had built was fractured. The truth, ugly, complicated, undeniable, was out. But what Peter chose to do with it, that was the storm still coming. The days after the Paris revelation unfolded like walking on glass. Every conversation with Peter was halting, brittle. He no longer looked at Camille with unbroken devotion, and she sensed it. Her laughter was tighter now, her smiles practiced but forced. The veneer of elegance had cracked, and beneath it was something sharp and desperate. I didn't press Peter. I knew better than to hound him when his mind was already in turmoil. Instead, I waited, holding the truth like a lantern in the dark. And then, the invitation came. The family dinner. Peter asked us all to gather at my house for dinner. His words over the phone were steady, but his tone betrayed the tension. "Mom, I think it's time we all sit down. Together. I need answers, and I need witnesses." Witnesses. That word struck me like a bell. This wouldn't just be dinner, it would be a reckoning. I set the table with my best china, the plates my mother had passed down to me, fragile but enduring. I roasted chicken, baked bread, mashed potatoes, my kind of food, hearty and real, not curated or dressed in pretense. The smell filled the house like memory itself, anchoring me in the traditions that had raised my children. Emily arrived first, with Liam in tow. Her eyes carried the weight of worry, but she hugged me tightly. Helen followed soon after, her face flushed, whispering that she couldn't stay long but wanted to support. Then came Peter and Camille. He looked weary, shoulders bowed. She walked beside him, poised as ever, but her eyes darted around the room, sharp and defensive. The confrontation begins. Dinner began quietly, small talk swirling around the table like smoke. But it didn't last. Peter set down his fork with deliberate force. "Enough," he said, his voice shaking. "We're not here for polite conversation. We're here for the truth. Camille, my mother says you've mocked her," in French, thinking she wouldn't understand. "She says you belittled her in her own home." Camille's face hardened. "This again. Really, Peter? Are we still dragging this out?" "Yes," he said firmly. "Because I need to know if the woman I'm going to marry respects my family or despises them." The room went still. Liam, sensing the tension, slipped off his chair and went to play in the living room. Emily folded her hands tightly in her lap. Helen's eyes darted from me to Camille, unsure where to land. Camille's mask cracks. Camille laughed, but it was hollow. "So what if I made a joke? Everyone jokes." Maybe I said something in French. Maybe your mother misunderstood. Why does it matter so much? Because it wasn't just a joke, I said, my voice steady but firm. It was the truth you thought you could whisper in another language, that I don't belong here, that I'm nothing more than quaint, that this family should move on without me. Her jaw clenched. For a moment, she said nothing. And then, like a storm breaking, she spat the words I knew had always been brewing. Fine. Yes. I said it. Because it's true. You cling to old ways, old food, old habits. You hold Peter back with your suffocating traditions. You think love is mashed potatoes and casseroles, but it's not. It's ambition, progress, refinement. You are dragging him down. The words slammed into the room like thunder. Emily gasped. Helen covered her mouth. Peter's face went white. The Paris reveal. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the envelope. Slowly, deliberately, I set it on the table. And dragging him down is what you've been doing all along, Camille. Paris, 2017. Do you want to tell them what happened? Or shall I? Her eyes widened, panic flashing across her face. Who told you about that? It doesn't matter, I said. What matters is that you built your life on deception. You reinvented yourself not out of growth, but out of fear. And now you want to reinvent this family in your image. You don't love Peter. You love what he can give you. Camille shot to her feet, her chair clattering against the floor. That's a lie. Everything I've done has been for us, for our future. Peter rose too, his face a storm. Our future, Camille? Or yours? Betrayal at the table. Emily spoke then, her voice trembling but strong. I heard you at book club, Camille. You mocked Loretta, called her rustic, said she was outdated. I kept quiet because I didn't want to cause trouble. But no more. You don't respect her. You never have. Helen, her voice shaking, added, and Peter, she's been whispering to me too, telling me maybe Mum should sit out of things, that it would be easier without her. I didn't want to believe it, but she trailed off, guilt heavy in her tone. The weight of their words pressed into the room like a storm cloud. Camille's eyes darted from face to face, realizing her fortress was crumbling. The breaking point. Peter turned to her, his voice low but unyielding. You mocked my mother. You lied about your past. You've tried to cut her out of my life. Is any of this even real, Camille? Or am I just another rung on your ladder? Her face twisted, desperation leaking through her poise. You don't understand. I wanted more than this small life. I wanted us to rise above it all. Can't you see? I was trying to make us better. Peter shook his head slowly, his voice breaking. By destroying the one person who's always loved me without condition. The cliffhanger. Camille's mask shattered. For the first time, she looked vulnerable, not polished, not perfect, but raw with fury and fear. She opened her mouth, as though to unleash another torrent, when a knock echoed at the door. We all froze. Peter glanced toward the entryway, his voice cautious. Who could that be? I stood, my heart pounding, and opened the door. There on the porch stood a man in a dark coat, holding a leather briefcase. His eyes scanned the room behind me before settling on Camille. Camille DuPont, he said, his accent crisp. I think we need to talk. The room erupted into stunned silence. The man's voice cut through the room like the final stroke of a gavel. His presence was calm, but his eyes carried the weight of knowledge, the kind that stripped away lies like paint peeling from old wood. Camille froze, her face pale. You've made a mistake, she said quickly, her words rushing. I don't know you. But he stepped inside, opening his briefcase with deliberate care. Oh, you know me, Madame DuPont. My name is Martin Rousseau. I represent parties in Paris who remember you very well. The stranger's revelation. Peter's voice cracked. Paris? Again. Camille, what is this? Martin pulled out documents, paper stamped, signed, ink faded but still official. In 2017, funds went missing from a trust in which Ms. DuPont was involved. Not illegal, but highly unethical. She withdrew money under the guise of investment, then disappeared before the scheme collapsed. Families were left ruined. Gasps rippled through the room. Emily's hand shot to her mouth. Helen whispered, Oh my God! Camille shook her head, her voice rising. Lies! All of it. They're twisting the truth. I left because I didn't want to be part of their corruption. I walked away. Martin's eyes narrowed. Perhaps. But you walked away with more than your share. He dropped the papers on the table, the sound like a judge's gavel striking. Your reinvention here does not erase what happened there. Peter's breaking point. Peter staggered back as though struck. You hid all of this from me. You mocked my mother, called her a burden, tried to erase her from my life, all while carrying this past. His voice cracked under the weight of betrayal. Camille, who are you? Her mask finally shattered. Tears welled in her eyes, but they were not soft tears of regret. They were sharp, angry, born of being cornered. I am someone who wanted more than this small life, more than mashed potatoes and small-town traditions. I wanted a future of elegance, of sophistication, of power. And you, she pointed at me, her voice sharp as a knife. You were always in the way, always holding him back, tying him to the past. I just wanted to free him. The silence that followed was crushing. Peter's hands shook. He looked at me, then back at her. And I saw it, the moment something broke inside him. I don't need freeing from my own mother, he said, his voice firm. I need freeing from you. The collapse. Camille's face twisted with rage. You'll regret this, Peter. All of you will. You think she can give you the life I can? You're pathetic. Stuck. Small. She grabbed her coat, her heels clicking furiously across the floor. For a heartbeat, she paused at the door, her eyes burning into me. Enjoy your victory, she spat. You'll be alone again soon enough. Then she was gone. The slam of the door echoed like thunder, rattling the china in its cabinets. The aftermath. The room remained still. Martin gathered his papers, quietly, his work done. He gave me a small nod, not of triumph, but of respect. I believe my job here is finished, he said softly, and then he too left. For a long moment, no one spoke. Peter stood in the center of the room, trembling. Finally, he turned to me, his face streaked with tears. Mom, I'm so sorry. I walked to him slowly, placing my hand on his cheek. Sorry won't change the past, Peter, but it can change what comes next. He broke then, his arms wrapping around me like the boy he once was. I should have believed you. I should have seen her for what she was. Instead, I let her convince me you were the problem. You, the woman who raised me, who gave me everything. I held him tightly, tears burning my own eyes. You were blinded by love. It happens. What matters is what you choose now. Emily came forward, her own eyes wet. Loretta, you saved us. If she had married Peter, if she had tied herself to this family, she broke off, shaking her head. We'd all have been destroyed. Helen nodded, guilt heavy on her face. I listened to her too, Mum. I let her poison me against you. I should have known better. I looked at them both, my voice steady. We can't change that she tried to divide us, but we can choose not to let her succeed. Family isn't perfect, but it's ours, and I will not be erased from it. The healing. Weeks passed. The storm slowly cleared. Peter broke off the engagement, and Camille slipped quietly out of our lives, her name never spoken above a whisper. For a while, the emptiness of her absence felt strange, like the echo of a bell long silenced. But slowly, the house filled with warmth again. Peter visited more often, bringing groceries, fixing things around the house. Emily invited me to dinners, where I was welcomed, not tolerated. Helen called nearly every day, her voice soft with apologies and love. And me, I began to breathe easier. I planted roses in the garden, their blooms fierce and red against the soil. I baked bread not because I had to, but because I wanted to. The house, once heavy with tension, grew light again. Reflection. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in shades of fire, Peter sat with me on the porch. His voice was quiet but sure. Mom, she called you small, rustic, outdated, but you're the strongest woman I've ever known. You raised me with love, and you taught me what family really means. She never understood that, but I do now. I smiled, brushing a tear from my cheek. Strength doesn't come from pretending to be more than you are, Peter. It comes from standing in your truth, even when others try to erase it. He nodded, his hand resting on mine. I'll never forget that again. Closing words. So here is the truth. My son's fiancée mocked me in French at dinner, thinking I wouldn't understand. But I did, and what began as a laugh over mashed potatoes became the unmasking of a woman who nearly stole my family. I was called small. I was called rustic. I was nearly erased. But in the end, it was not me who was diminished. It was her. Family is not about sophistication or refinement or curated appearances. Family is about love, loyalty, and the courage to stand together when lies threaten to tear you apart. I understood every word she said. And now, my family understands every word I live by. I belong. I always have. And I always will.